花の色は移りにけりないたずらに、我が身世に降る眺めせしまに、我が身世に降る眺めせしまに。
Like cherry blossoms after the long rainy days, my beauty is fading, with days of love in vain, now seen in the distance.
こんにちは。Hello everyone, I'm Mihoko. I was not singing, but I was reading an ancient Japanese Waka poetry. Waka poetry has 31 syllable verse with 5 lines in 5, 7, 5, 7, 7 syllables respectively. I repeated the last 2 lines. In Japan, there is a traditional card game that is popular among people of all ages. Some people enjoy the game during the New Year holidays. The game is called Hyakunin-Isshu, literally meaning 100 persons, one poetry. That is 100 poetries by 100 different poets. All the poetries were composed in Japanese classical Waka style. Hyakunin-Isshu was compiled by famous poet Fujiwara no Teika in the 13th century. He collected the poetries of 100 outstanding poets active from the 7th to the 13th century. This box contains a total of 200 cards of 2 different types, 100 cards each.
One type is for reading. Those cards have figures, names, and poetries of poets. The other is for taking, and those cards have the last 2 lines of 7 syllables written in hiragana letters. For playing, we lay out 100 hiragana cards on the floor. When the person starts reading out the poetry, other people take corresponding hiragana card as fast as possible. The player with the most cards is the winner.
This time, I'll introduce 8 Waka poetries. After reading one poetry in Japanese, I'll say its English translation. In the ancient times, Waka poetry was an important culture in high society, and being good at Waka poetry was necessary for success in love and career. I'll talk about when people actually wrote Waka poetries. There are various situations people had to do so. You learn about the social background of the time through Waka poetries. I hope you'll enjoy it.
The first poet is Abe no Nakamaro. He lived in the 8th century, and the capital of Japan was Nara at that time. He was born in the capital, which was an imitation of the Chinese capital. The imperial court was actively introducing Chinese culture to Japan. The imperial court selected outstanding young men and sent them to China to study. One of them was Nakamaro. He went to China at the age of 19. His ability was so extraordinary that he became the favorite of the Chinese emperor and kept getting promoted. As a result, he was not allowed to return to Japan. 30 years later, he was finally given permission to return home, and a farewell party was held for him. His good friends, famous Chinese poets, attended there. Nakamaro composed a poetry remembering the mountain of his hometown. However, the ship he was on was wrecked, and he had no choice but to return to China. Without making it back to Japan, he passed away in China at the age of 73. His good friend, the Chinese poet, wrote a poetry of sorrow. 天の原降り裂け見れば春が鳴る。三笠の山に入れし月かも。Looking up the sky, surely the same moon that shone over Mount Mikasa in my hometown Kasuga all those years ago. In the beginning of this video, I was reading the poetry by Onono Komachi. She lived in the 9th century and served the aristocratic people in Kyoto, the capital city at that time. Although there are so many legends about her, almost nothing of her life is known for certain. She was renowned for her unusual beauty. She is regarded as the best female poet of her time. The names of the various men with whom she was romantically involved and the poetries exchanged with her are preserved in the Imperial Anthology of Japanese Poetry. In the temple where she is said to have died is her grave. In another temple that is said to be the site of her residence is a mound enshrining many love letters she received. Today, the name of Komachi is a synonym for feminine beauty in Japan. The next poet is Kino Tsurayuki. He was the greatest poet of aristocratic period. This poetry has a preface. He used to stay at the same inn every time he went to visit Hase Temple. He didn't visit it for a while, and when he came back years later, the innkeeper told him, "My inn is exactly as it used to be, but you changed your mind and haven't been here for a long time." Hearing that, Tsurayuki broke off a branch of a plum tree nearby and composed the poetry in prompt. This kind of poetry is called greeting phrases. 人はいさ心も知らずふるさとは花ぞ昔のカニにおいける You asked me how I was doing away from this place for years. I wonder how your mind is, but the fragrance of the plum blossoms remains here as it always was. The next poet is Taira no Kanemori. In the days when the emperor was at the top and the aristocracy was in power, the emperors occasionally held poetry competitions. The outstanding poets of the time were divided into two groups and competed to win or lose. The subject of the poetry was decided in advance. When Kanemori participated in one contest, his subject was enduring love. He was an aristocrat, but his opponent was of low status living in the province. The opponent came to the capital with the formal clothes for the poetry competition. Both his and his opponent's poetries were excellent, but in the end, Kanemori won. His opponent was extremely disappointed. The opponent's poetry was also selected for Hyakunin-Isshu. 忍ぶれど色に出にけり我が恋は物や思と人のとまで Though I try to keep it secret, deep love comes out somehow on my face. Others keep asking me, who is in my mind? The next poet is Fujiwara no Yoshitaka. Born a son of a powerful nobleman, he reached a high social position in his teens. He was so handsome that people said there would never be a more beautiful man in the future. As he had a good character and was a good poet, he was extremely popular. He was very religious and had a desire to become a Buddhist priest. In those days, for a man of high rank, it was polite to write a letter to a woman immediately after spending a night with her. The sooner he wrote, the more sincere he was considered to be. If the man continued to visit the same woman for 3 days straight, it was a sign that he was willing to marry her. Yoshitaka wrote the poetry early in the morning after he left the woman's home. In spite of his promising future, he contracted smallpox during a pandemic and died at the age of 21. His eldest brother had the same disease and died on the same day. 君がためお叱らざりし命さえ長くもがなと思いけるかな Never spared my life to devote my love to you after spending the night. To be with you, my love, wish I could live forever. The next is a female poet, Akazome Emon. In the days of the aristocracy, the relationship between men and women was a visiting marriage, in which a man would visit a woman's house at night in an ox cart and spend the night. Men had several wives, and women lived off the gifts and money the men gave them when visiting. However, when men lost interest and stopped going to women's homes, marriage spontaneously ended, making life difficult for women. The poet had a sister. One night, her sister's boyfriend said he would be there that night, but didn't show up. So Akazome Emon wrote a poetry for her sister and sent it to her lover.
安らわでねなましものをさよふけて傾くまでの月を見しかな傾くまでの月を見しかな Waited for you so long, watching the sky alone, until the moon went down. If I knew you wouldn't come, I would have gone to sleep.
The next poet is Fujiwara no Tadamichi. He was a powerful nobleman. When he and the emperor rode out to sea, the emperor told him to compose a poetry entitled A Distant View of the Sea. It was an improvised poetry.
綿の原こぎ出てみれば久方の雲井に孫を置きつ白波 Rowing out in the ocean toward the horizon far away, white waves on the water, mistaken for sea of clouds in the sky.
The last poet is Minamoto no Sanetomo. His father founded the first samurai military government in Kamakura, far from Kyoto, the then capital city of Japan. After the death of his father, his eldest brother succeeded his father's position, but a few years later he was ousted. Sanetomo became the third shogun, top general, at the age of 12. He spent his entire life in Kamakura, but from a young age, he preferred the culture of imperial aristocracy in the capital, such as ancient kickball game and Waka poetry. He was particularly interested in Waka poetry and received instruction from Tanka living in the capital. Suffering from the complicated world of politics, he continued to write great poetries and compiled his own works. He ended his life at the age of 28, due to the assassination by his nephew. 世の中は常にもがもな渚こぐ天のお船の綱で悲しも Seashore with fishermen pulling a small boat by the rope, moving my mind just by seeing, wishing this world would also be continuing the way it is for good.
I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. ありがとうございました。